Get that rusted heap off my driveway before I have it crushed for scrap, you glorified stable boy. Hilara Vance stood there in a light blue suit that cost more than the truck she was screaming at, her finger jabbing the air inches from my chest. She looked at the dust on my boots and the worn brim of my hat and saw exactly what she wanted to see. A drifter. Nobody. A cowboy who had wandered too far from the pasture and into her manicured, multi-million-dollar kingdom. She did not see the man who had spent the last 15 years calculating load-bearing thresholds for dams in conflict zones or mapping floodplains for the Army Corps of Engineers. She did not know that the rusted heap she was threatening contained a military-grade satellite positioning unit and a laser total station worth $500,000. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply reached into the ignition, pulled the key, and dropped it into the palm of the security guard standing nervously behind her. He looked at the key like it was a live grenade. "Careful with the suspension," I said, my voice low and even, the kind of tone you use when you are trying to keep a bridge from collapsing under stress. "That truck belongs to the United States government." Hilara laughed, a sharp, brittle sound like glass breaking on patio stones. She waved her hand, dismissing me as she turned back to her entourage of clipboard-wielding assistants. The guard hesitated, glancing between the furious Homeowners Association president and the calm stranger who had just surrendered his vehicle without a fight. He chose the paycheck. He climbed into the driver's seat, and I watched as my truck, and my means of leaving, disappeared around the bend of the paved road that cut through the heart of my family's land. I turned my back on them and walked toward the edge of the property line she claimed was hers. I pulled a notebook from my back pocket, the leather cover stained with sweat and oil from a dozen different countries. I wasn't looking at the view, though it was spectacular. The sun was cutting through the Montana mist, lighting up 900 acres of wilderness that my Uncle Silas had spent his life protecting. I was looking at the foundation of her 4-story glass and steel mansion. To the untrained eye, it was a marvel of modern architecture. To a geologist and structural engineer, it was a ticking time bomb. There was a hairline fracture running along the north retention wall, barely visible beneath the fresh stucco. The earth was moving. Gravity and water were having a conversation that Hilara Vance was ignoring, and the physics of this valley did not care about her bank account. I had arrived 48 hours ago, expecting to bury my uncle and sort through a few boxes of old paperwork. Instead, I walked into a war zone, disguised as a luxury resort. Silas had died of a heart attack 2 weeks prior, alone in the cabin that sat in the shadow of this monstrosity. The official report said natural causes, but the stack of unopened legal threats on his kitchen table told a different story. Stress had stopped his heart as surely as a bullet. He had tried to fight them. He had written letters, made calls, and tried to explain that you cannot build a mansion on a limestone shelf that feeds a federal watershed. They had crushed him with paperwork and intimidation. Now they wanted to crush me. "You're still here?" Hilara's voice cut through my concentration. She had circled back, realizing I hadn't dissolved into the ether just because she took my truck. "I'm issuing a citation for loitering and visual nuisance. $5,000. Payable immediately, or we place a lien on whatever shack you're squatting in." She shoved a paper into my hand. I took it. I folded it neatly along the crease and placed it in my shirt pocket, right next to my mechanical pencil. "You built your pool deck over a Class 1 aquifer," I said, looking past her at the shimmering water behind the glass railing. The subsidence is already starting. I give it 6 months before that patio cracks in half. This is nonsense, she scoffed, adjusting the lapel of her blazer. My engineers are the best in the state. Now get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing. I tipped my hat, turned, and began the long walk back to the old cabin. Patience is a weapon. It is the only weapon that works against people who believe they own the world. They expect noise, they expect resistance, and they can shout down. They do not know what to do with silence. I am curious where you are watching this story unfold from, and if land laws in your country protect the honest or the wealthy. Let me know in the comments below. Because what happened next happens more often than you think. The cabin was a mile away, tucked into a grove of pine trees that shielded it from the worst of the wind. It was humble, built from logs cut on this very land 70 years ago. When I stepped inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of old paper and wood smoke. I locked the door, though a lock meant little out here if someone really wanted in. The sun began to dip below the ridgeline, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley. I lit a kerosene lamp, the soft glow illuminating the map I had pinned to the wall. It was a topographic survey from 1952. According to this map, Ilara's mansion was sitting in the middle of a flood zone. According to her map, the one filed with the county, the land was solid bedrock. Maps don't lie, but people do. At 7 p.m., the lights flickered and died. I tried the switch. Nothing. I checked the breaker box. Dead. I looked out the window and saw the glow of the mansion on the hill, burning bright like a cruise ship in the night. They had cut the power. Level 2. Isolation. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. They wanted to scare me. They wanted me cold and hungry and desperate enough to sign the quitclaim deed they had slipped into my mailbox yesterday. They thought darkness would break me. But I had spent months in the desert where the only light came from the stars, and I knew that darkness was where you found the things that people tried to hide. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and my coat. I wasn't going to sit there and wait for them to make the next move. I needed to clear my head. And I needed to visit the one living thing on this ranch that had been here longer than any of us. The old sentinel stood a mile west of the cabin, a massive oak tree that had survived droughts, wildfires, and harsh Montana winters. It was an anomaly, growing so large in this soil. But Uncle Silas used to say it was because the tree had found a secret source of water deep underground. As a boy, I had spent hours climbing its branches, hiding from the world in its canopy. It was my sanctuary. I walked through the tall grass, the beam of my flashlight cutting a cone through the blackness. The air was crisp, biting at my exposed skin. When the tree came into view, its silhouette looked like a giant hand reaching for the sky. I approached it with a sense of reverence. "Hello, old friend," I whispered, placing a hand on the rough bark. I walked around the base, shining the light on the massive roots that snaked into the earth like veins. That was when I saw it. A scar on the bark, low to the ground, near the largest root. It wasn't natural. It was a healed cut, shaped like an arrow, pointing straight down into a hollow between two roots that was choked with moss and dead leaves. I froze. Silas was never carved on trees. He treated this land like a church. Unless he wanted to leave a sign. I knelt in the dirt, the cold seeping through my jeans. I pulled a knife from my belt and carefully scraped away the moss. Beneath the vegetation, the earth was loose. I dug with my hands, my fingers brushing against something cold and hard. Metal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled deeper, widening the hole until I could grip the handle of a rusted metal box. It was an old military ammo can, the kind Silas used to keep his tools in. I dragged it out, the metal scraping against the stone, and set it on the grass. I wiped the dirt from the latch and pried it open. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect against moisture, was a leather-bound notebook and a single sheet of carbon paper. I unfolded the paper first. It was brittle, yellowed with age. There was no letter, no explanation, just a string of numbers written in Silas's shaky handwriting.
L. 442.8. FL 1982. Void. I stared at the numbers, my mind racing to translate the code. To anyone else, it would have been gibberish. To a structural engineer who specialized in hydrology, it was a confession. EL meant elevation, 442.8 feet above sea level. FL meant federal line, established in 1982. Void meant the legal status of the land. I looked up toward the mansion on the hill, estimating its position. I knew the topography of this valley by heart. The foundation of Alara's $4 million palace sat at an elevation of roughly 440 feet, 2.8 feet. She was 2.8 feet below the historic floodline. The air left my lungs in a rush. This wasn't just a boundary dispute. This wasn't just a rich woman stealing land. This was federal fraud. Someone had altered the survey data to lower the floodline on paper, turning a federally protected wetland into buildable real estate. They had erased the water to build a castle, and Silas had hidden the proof right here, under the roots of the tree that drank from that very water. Holy cow, I whispered into the darkness. You knew, Silas. You knew, and they buried you for it. I opened the leather notebook. It was a hydrology log dating back 40 years. Silas had manually recorded the water table levels every month. Page after page of data proving that the land beneath the mansion was not bedrock, but a saturated sponge that would liquefy the moment the water table rose. I stood up, clutching the box to my chest. The isolation, the fines, the intimidation, it all made sense now. They weren't trying to drive me out because I was an eyesore. They were trying to drive me out because I was the only person who could read the land well enough to expose a crime that could send them all to prison. I needed to verify this. I needed satellite data. I ran back to the cabin, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly ahead of me. I burst through the door and grabbed my backup power bank from my rucksack. I plugged in my satellite laptop, a ruggedized machine designed to work in the middle of deserts and jungles. It booted up, the screen casting a blue glow over the dusty room. I connected to the USGS database, bypassing the local county servers that Alara likely had access to. I pulled the raw topological data for this quadrant. I overlaid the historic flood maps from 1982. The screen refreshed, rendering the layers. There it was. A sea of red pixels indicating a high-risk flood zone covering the entire eastern bluff, exactly where the mansion stood. But when I pulled the current county zoning map, the red zone had been miraculously carved out, shaped perfectly around her property line. Nature doesn't make straight lines like that. Only corruption does. I needed backup. I needed someone who knew the local players, someone who had been burned by them. I remembered a name Silas had mentioned in one of his letters years ago, Jackson, an old irrigation engineer who used to work for the County Planning Commission. I searched for him online. Jackson Miller, disgraced, fired 10 years ago for insubordination, living in a trailer park 3 towns over. I couldn't call him. My phone lines were likely monitored, and cell service was non-existent out here. I had to go to him, but I had no truck. I sat back, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I had the evidence. I had the expertise. Now I just needed to survive long enough to use them. The next morning, the sun rose blood red over the mountains. I was drinking black coffee, boiled on the wood stove, when I heard the rumble. It was a deep, guttural sound that shook the floorboards. Diesel engines, heavy machinery. I stepped out onto the porch. A yellow bulldozer was tearing up the dirt road, flanked by 2 pickup trucks with the HOA logo on the doors. They were heading west, toward the old Sentinel. "Exactly right," I muttered, grabbing my coat and the piece of paper with the numbers. "You want to erase the evidence." I sprinted across the field, my boots pounding the hard earth. The bulldozer was moving fast, its blade raised, aiming straight for the massive oak tree. Alara was standing by one of the trucks, arms crossed, wearing a pristine white windbreaker, watching the destruction with a satisfied smirk. I cut across the pasture, lungs burning, and planted myself directly in the path of the machine. The driver slammed on the brakes, the tracks grinding to a halt just 10 feet from where I stood. The blade hovered in the air, a ton of steel ready to drop. "Move," the driver shouted, leaning out of the cab. "You're not touching this tree," I yelled back, my voice steady despite the roar of the engine. Alara walked over, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. She looked annoyed, like I was a fly that refused to be swatted. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we are conducting necessary landscaping. That tree is diseased. It poses a risk to the community infrastructure." "Diseased?" I laughed, a harsh sound. "That tree is healthier than your conscience, Alara, and you're not here for landscaping. You're here because you know what's underneath it." Her eyes narrowed, just a fraction, a flicker of doubt behind the arrogance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "But you are obstructing authorized work. I have a permit right here to remove this hazard." She waved a piece of paper. Another forgery. Another lie stamped with an official seal. "And I have this," I said, holding up the carbon paper with Silas's numbers. I held it high so she could see it clearly. The wind caught the edge, fluttering it like a flag. "Elevation 442.8, I recited, locking eyes with her. "Federal line 1982, void." She went still. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath her makeup. She knew those numbers. She had spent a lot of money to bury them. "You built your palace in a bathtub, Alara," I said, stepping closer, the bulldozer looming over me. "And you paid off the county to say it was dry land. That's not just a zoning violation. That is violating the Clean Water Act. That is federal jurisdiction." "This is nonsense," she whispered, but the venom was gone, replaced by fear. "You're a crazy man with a piece of trash paper." "Then run me over," I said, gesturing to the bulldozer. "Bury me with the tree. But you can't bulldoze physics, you can't bribe gravity, and you certainly can't hide from the United States Army Corps of Engineers once they have these coordinates." She stared at me, her chest heaving. She looked at the driver, then back at me. She was calculating the risk. If she hurt me now, with those numbers in the open, it was over. If she retreated, she bought time. "Pull back," she snapped at the driver. "But Mrs. Vance, I said pull back," she screamed, her composure cracking. She turned to me, her eyes cold and hard as flint. "You think a few numbers will save you? You have no idea who you are dealing with. You are one man against a machine that runs this entire county. You won't survive the week." "I don't need to survive the week," I said. "I just need to survive until the mail runs." She stormed back to her truck, slamming the door so hard the vehicle shook. The convoy reversed, gears grinding, dust choking the air, retreating back toward the mansion. I watched them go, standing guard beneath the old sentinel. I waited until they were out of sight before I let my knees buckle. I sat down at the base of the tree, taking a deep breath of the pine-scented air. I had won the skirmish, but the war was just starting. They knew I had the proof now. They wouldn't send a bulldozer next time. They would send something worse. I looked at the numbers again. I needed Jackson. I needed to get this data into the hands of the feds before Alara's husband, the judge, signed a warrant for my arrest or a demolition order for the cabin. I packed the ammo box into my rucksack. I checked the charge on my satellite laptop. I had a long walk ahead of me to the next town, and I had to move through the woods to avoid the roads they were surely watching. This land had belonged to my family for 3 generations. They had tried to steal it with a smile and a pen. Now I was going to take it back with a map and a federal indictment. I stood up, slung the pack over my shoulder, and started walking west, away from the road, disappearing into the timber just as the first stars began to appear. I wasn't just a geologist anymore. I was a ghost in my own home, hunting the people who had haunted my uncle to his grave. If you are still here, I know you crave justice just as much as I do. Drop a scale of justice emoji in the comments to let me know you are standing with me in this fight. The hike to the neighboring town took 4 hours. I moved through the underbrush, avoiding the main trails. I could hear the distant hum of ATVs patrolling the perimeter of the ranch. Alara's private security sweeping the grid. They were looking for me. I reached the outskirts of the trailer park just past midnight. It was a grid of aluminum siding and faded awnings, a place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. I found Jackson's trailer by the number Silas had written down years ago. It was dark, the windows covered with tin foil. I knocked on the metal door. 3 sharp raps. Silence. Then the sound of a shotgun racking. "Go away," a voice rasped from inside. "I paid the rent." "Jackson," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm Silas Sterling's nephew. I have the numbers. 442.8. The door flew open. A man stood there, gaunt and unshaven, wearing a stained undershirt and holding a 12-gauge. He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing. "Silas is dead," he said. "I know," I replied, "and Alara Vance killed him. I want to return the favor." Jackson stared at me for a long moment, then stepped back and lowered the gun. "Get in here, before they see you." The inside of the trailer was a shrine to conspiracy and engineering. Maps covered every inch of the walls. Blueprints, zoning applications, geological surveys. It was the command center of a man who had been obsessed with one thing for 10 years. "I told him not to fight them alone," Jackson muttered, clearing a stack of newspapers off a chair. I told Silas, that woman has the county commissioner in her pocket and the sheriff in her bed. You can't win. I found the void line, I said, placing the laptop on his table. I have the ammo box. Jackson froze. He looked at the laptop, then at me. You found the box? Under the Sentinel. He let out a low whistle. He actually saved it. I thought he burned it to keep them safe. Keep who safe? You, Jackson said. And me. That box is the smoking gun, kid. It proves the original survey was forged. I was the one who refused to sign the new one. That's why they fired me. They brought in a contractor from out of state to stamp it. Who signed it? I asked. Look at the digital signature on the county server, Jackson said, moving to his own battered computer. They scrubbed the physical archive, but they forgot about the microfiche backups in the state library. I pulled this 2 years ago. He brought up an image on the screen. A building permit, dated 3 years prior. The signature at the bottom was illegible, a scrawl of ink, but the notary stamp next to it was clear. Notary Public, Leonard Vance. Her husband, I said. The judge. Exactly right. Jackson grinned, revealing a missing tooth. He notarized the fraudulent survey that his wife used to steal your land. That's conflict of interest, fraud, and conspiracy. And the floodline? That's the kicker, Jackson said, tapping the map on his wall. They didn't just move the property line. They backfilled the ravine. They dumped thousands of tons of fill dirt into a federal waterway to create the pad for that mansion. That's why the foundation is cracking. The water is still down there, trying to get out. If we can prove the fill is there, we prove they altered a navigable waterway, Jackson finished. That brings in the EPA and the Army Corps. The county can't protect them from the feds. I need to make a call, I said. I still have contacts at the Corps, but I need to do it from a secure line. You're looking at it, Jackson said, pointing to a dusty landline phone in the corner. Hardline, no GPS, no intercepts. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a sound of possibility. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. It rang 3 times. Army Corps, Northwest District, Commander Hayes speaking. Commander, I said, this is Cade Sterling. I have a Code 404 violation in Montana. Massive scale. Structural instability on a Class 1 aquifer. I need an inspection team. There was a pause on the line. Sterling? I thought you retired. I did, I said, but I just inherited a crime scene. Send me the coordinates, Hayes said, his tone shifting to professional urgency. If it's as bad as you say, we can have a team there in 24 hours. I'm sending the data now, I said. But Commander, bring the marshals. The locals are hostile. Understood. Sit tight, Sterling. I hung up. Jackson was watching me with a mixture of awe and terror. They're coming? He asked. They're coming, I said. Now we just have to stay alive until noon tomorrow. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside made us both jump. Jackson grabbed the shotgun. I killed the lights. We peered through the sliver of foil on the window. A black SUV was prowling slowly down the rows of trailers. It wasn't the police, it was private security. Alara's goons. They knew. How did they find us? I whispered. They didn't, Jackson said, racking the slide. They're sweeping every known associate of your uncle. They're cleaning the house. We can't stay here, I said. If they find this room, they burn the evidence. Back door, Jackson said, Leads to the drainage ditch. We can double back to the ranch. To the ranch? I asked. That's where they'll be waiting. Exactly. Jackson smiled grimly. They'll be waiting at the cabin. They won't be expecting us at the mansion. You want to break into the mansion? I don't want to break in, Jackson said. I want to break the foundation. If we can trigger the water pressure sensor in the basement, it sends an automatic alarm to the State Geological Survey. It forces an immediate evacuation order. You want to sink the house, I realized. I want to let nature take its course, Jackson corrected. You said it yourself. You can't bribe gravity. We slipped out the back door into the cool night air, leaving the trailer behind. We moved through the shadows, heading back toward the lion's den. I had the numbers. I had the feds en route. And now, I had a plan to bring the whole corrupt empire crashing down, literally. The walk back was tense. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. But as the silhouette of the mansion rose against the starlit sky, looking arrogant and invincible, I felt a cold calm settle over me. Alara Vance had built her castle on sand and lies. Tomorrow, the tide was coming in. The darkness surrounding the mansion was not empty. It was heavy with the hum of expensive security systems and the rustle of the wind through the pines. Jackson and I moved like shadows, skirting the perimeter of the floodlights that bathed Alara's fortress in an artificial daylight. We weren't trying to get inside the house itself. That would be burglary. We were aiming for the service access panel Jackson had installed 15 years ago, a concrete hatch buried under what was now Alara's pristine rose garden. Watch the cameras, I whispered, scanning the eaves of the house with a small thermal monocular I'd pulled from my pack. She has motion sensors on the patio. I know, Jackson grunted, keeping low. I designed the drainage grid before she paved over it. The sensors are wired to the main house power. If we trip them, the silent alarm goes to the sheriff, and the sheriff is her nephew. We crawled through the wet grass, the smell of damp earth and ozone filling the air. The mansion loomed above us, a glass monolith defying the laws of nature. From this angle, I could see the hairline fracture in the foundation more clearly. It was weeping. A slow, dark stain of moisture was spreading across the concrete, betraying the secret Alara had spent millions to hide. The water was already reclaiming its territory. We reached the edge of the rose garden. Jackson pulled a trowel from his belt and began to dig, his movements frantic but precise. It should be right here, he muttered, unless she poured the slab over the maintenance hatch. A moment later, metal scraped against stone. Jackson grinned in the dark, his teeth flashing white. He cleared the dirt away from a rusted iron ring and pulled. The hatch groaned, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence, but it opened. A blast of cold, stale air hit us, smelling of rot and standing water. After you, Jackson said. I dropped into the hole, landing in ankle-deep mud. Jackson followed, pulling the hatch closed above us. We were in the crawl space, the void that the survey maps claimed didn't exist. I clicked on my tactical light. The beam revealed a nightmare of engineering. The ground beneath the mansion wasn't solid bedrock. It was a swamp. Massive steel pilings had been driven into the mud, but they were already corroding. The sound of running water was everywhere, a constant, rushing gurgle. Look at that! Jackson pointed his light at a large PVC pipe running along the ceiling of the crawlspace. That's the bypass. She diverted the underground stream into a storm drain to dry out the land for the inspection. It's illegal, dangerous, and, he tapped the pipe, under immense pressure. If we uncap the pressure valve, I said, realizing his plan, the water reverts to its natural course. Exactly right, Jackson said. The water table rises instantly. The hydrostatic pressure triggers the geological sensors the state planted in the valley floor 10 years ago. It sends a code red instability alert to the USGS servers in Denver. No human intervention needed. The earth tells on her. Do it, I said. Jackson moved to the valve wheel, rusted and seized with age. He gripped it with both hands, straining, his boots slipping in the mud. It's stuck, he grunted. I moved beside him, adding my weight to the wheel. Together, on 3. We heaved. The metal groaned, screeched, and then gave way. The wheel spun. Immediately, the sound of the water changed from a gurgle to a roar. The pipe vibrated violently. Beneath our feet, the mud began to churn. We need to go, Jackson yelled over the noise. The water level is going to rise fast. We scrambled back to the hatch. I pushed it open, and we hauled ourselves out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. The ground beneath us trembled slightly, a vibration you would miss if you weren't looking for it. But the sensors wouldn't miss it. As we retreated into the tree line, I looked back at the mansion. The lights were still on, the residents sleeping soundly, unaware that the lie holding up their roof had just been washed away. We made it back to the cabin just before dawn. I didn't sleep. I spent the remaining hours shaving the beard I had grown over the last few weeks, scrubbing the dirt from my skin, and pulling my dress uniform from the bottom of my rucksack. I wasn't going to the HOA meeting as Cade Sterling, the rancher's nephew. I was going as Major Sterling, Army Corps of Engineers, inactive reserve but fully authorized to act in times of environmental crisis. I stood before the cracked mirror, adjusting the tie. I looked different, sharper, dangerous in a bureaucratic way. Jackson sat at the table drinking coffee, watching me with a grim smile. You look like the Grim Reaper of paperwork, he said. That's exactly what I am, I replied. I checked my watch. The meeting starts in 2 hours. The USGS alert should be hitting the federal dashboard right about now. If you are still here at this point, you know that the only thing more satisfying than revenge is justice served cold. Drop a scales of justice emoji in the comments to let me know you are ready for the takedown. The Lakeview Estates Community Center was a testament to excess. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors, and a coffee bar that cost more than my uncle's truck. The room was packed. 50 homeowners, terrified by the rumors of lawsuits and instability, sat in rows of plush chairs. At the front of the room, on a raised stage, stood Alara Vance. She looked impeccable in her signature light blue suit, a wireless microphone in her hand. Behind her, a large screen projected a graph showing rising property values. She was in full damage control mode. These rumors are nothing more than the jealous ramblings of a failed man, she was saying, her voice soothing and authoritative. Mr. Sterling is a transient with a vendetta. He has no claim to this land, and his threats are empty. I have spoken to the sheriff, and we have a restraining order in process. By tomorrow, he will be removed from the county. A murmur of relief went through the crowd. They wanted to believe her. They needed to believe her. Their life savings were tied up in these houses. I pushed open the double oak doors at the back of the room. I didn't slam them. I didn't shout. I just walked in, the heels of my dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble. The sound cut through Alara's speech like a metronome. Heads turned. Whispers broke out. I wasn't the dusty cowboy they had seen getting his truck towed. I was a man in a crisp uniform, carrying a leather briefcase and an air of absolute authority. Alara faltered. She squinted against the stage lights, trying to make out who had interrupted her. When she recognized me, her face contorted in a mix of confusion and rage. "Security!" she barked. "Remove this man immediately. He is violating a private meeting." Two hired guards stepped forward, reaching for my arms. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even look at them. I simply held up a gold badge encased in leather. "Federal officer," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room without shouting. "Interfering with an ongoing environmental investigation is a felony carrying a mandatory 5-year sentence. Step aside." The guards froze. They looked at the badge, then at Alara. They stepped aside. I walked up the center aisle, the crowd parting for me. I climbed the stairs to the stage. Alara backed away, clutching the microphone like a weapon. "This is nonsense," she hissed, though her voice wavered. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is private property." "This is a federal crime scene," I corrected her. I reached past her and plugged a flash drive into the podium's media console. The screen behind her flickered. The graph of property values vanished, replaced by a 3D topographic map of the valley. It was the data I had pulled from the USGS servers, overlaid with the current sensor readings Jackson and I had triggered. A massive red zone pulsed directly beneath the mansion and the surrounding homes. "What you are looking at," I said, addressing the audience, "is the hydrological reality of Lakeview Estates. You were told you were buying homes on solid bedrock. You were lied to." The room erupted. People stood up, shouting questions. Alara tried to shout over them. "He's faking it! That's a simulation! Turn it off!" She clawed at the console, trying to yank the drive out. I caught her wrist, gently, but with iron firmness. "Don't touch that, Alara. That creates a digital timestamp. Every time you touch it, you add another count of evidence tampering to your indictment." She ripped her hand away, trembling. "You're insane. My husband is the judge in this county. He will have you buried under the jail." "Your husband," I said, clicking a remote I had palmed, "is currently explaining to the FBI why his notary stamp is on a forged survey document dated 3 years ago." The screen changed again. This time it showed a split screen. On the left, the forged permit with the illegible signature and Leonard Vance's stamp. On the right, the original survey from the ammo box, showing the void floodline. And below them, a bank transfer record I had pulled with Jackson's help, a $50,000 payment from the HOA account to a shell company registered to the county planning commissioner. "This is nonsense!" Alara shrieked, her voice cracking. "These are fabrications. Who are you to come in here and destroy our lives?" "I am the man whose family you stole from," I said. "But more importantly, I am the man who just saved you from drowning in your own living rooms." I pointed to the map. At 4 a.m. this morning, the illegal bypass diverting the underground aquifer was disengaged. The water table is returning to its natural level. As we speak, the soil beneath this building is liquefying. As if on cue, a deep groaning sound echoed through the building. It wasn't the sound of pipes or wind. It was the sound of structural steel twisting under immense pressure. Dust drifted down from the vaulted ceiling. The room went dead silent. "Get out," I said calmly into the microphone. "Now." Panic is a strange thing. It doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes, it looks like a stampede of well-dressed people realizing their safety was an illusion. The homeowners rushed the exits. The sound of chairs overturning and frantic voices filled the hall. Alara stood frozen on the stage, watching her kingdom empty out. She looked at the screen, then at me. "You did this," she whispered. "You ruined everything. You ruined it the day you decided the rules didn't apply to you," I said. Through the large windows at the back of the hall, flashing lights appeared, blue and red, painting the walls in a chaotic strobe. But these weren't sheriff's deputies. These were black SUVs with government plates. The doors burst open again. A team of agents in windbreakers emblazoned with EPA and U.S. Marshals swarmed into the room. Leading them was Commander Hayes, looking as formidable as I remembered him. He walked straight to the stage. Alara looked at him, then at her husband, Leonard, who was being led in through the side door in handcuffs. His head hung low. "Alara Vance," Hayes said, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for violation of the Clean Water Act, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and bribery of a public official." Alara stumbled back, her heels catching on the carpet. "No," she stammered. "No, this is a mistake. I am the president of the HOA. I am—" "You are a criminal," Hayes said. He nodded to two marshals. They stepped forward. Alara Vance, the woman who had terrorized my uncle and threatened to crush my truck, offered no resistance. She went limp, the fight draining out of her as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The light blue suit, once a symbol of her untouchable power, now just looked like a costume she had worn too long. As they led her away, she stopped and looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying clarity. She finally saw me. Not the stable boy, not the drifter, but the stone she had broken herself against. "This land," she spat, "is worthless without us." "This land," I replied, "was perfect before you touched it." I walked out of the community center and into the fresh air. The sun was shining, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Jackson was waiting by the entrance, leaning against a pillar, smoking a cigarette. He nodded at the convoy of federal vehicles. "Show's over?" he asked. "Just the first act," I said. "Now comes the cleanup." The aftermath was slow, painful, and absolute. The federal investigation took 6 months. They uncovered a web of corruption that went deeper than just the ranch. Alara and Leonard Vance had been running a real estate scheme across 3 counties, using fake surveys and paid-off officials to develop protected lands. They were facing federal prison time, 10 years minimum, no parole for environmental crimes of this magnitude. The mansion was condemned within a week. The structural instability I had triggered was irreversible. The foundation had shifted 4 inches in 24 hours. It was a total loss. The demolition began in the fall. I stood on the hill with Jackson, watching the same yellow bulldozers that had threatened the old Sentinel now tearing into the glass and steel of Alara's palace. It was a cathartic sight, watching the monument to greed being dismantled piece by piece. The other homeowners were victims, too, in a way. They had lost their investments, duped by a woman they trusted. But the Federal Restitution Fund, seized from Alara's offshore accounts, would cover some of their losses. Most of them moved away, happy to leave the cursed valley behind. When the last of the debris was hauled away, the land looked scarred, raw earth exposed where the manicured lawns had been. But nature is resilient. Give it a season, and the grass would return. Give it a year, and you wouldn't know a mansion had ever stood there. I spent the next spring replanting. I brought in native pines and aspen, restoring the tree line my grandfather had started. I filled in the illegal drainage ditches, letting the water flow back into the wetlands. The frogs returned. The herons came back to the crescent shoreline. I didn't keep the land for myself. I couldn't. It was too big, too important for one man to hoard. I worked with the state to designate the 900 acres as the Silas Sterling Wildlife Preserve. It would remain wild, protected by a trust that no HOA could ever touch. I kept only the small parcel with the cabin and the old sentinel. One evening, a year after the arrest, I sat beneath the great oak tree. The sun was setting, casting long golden rays through the leaves. The scar on the root where I had found the ammo box was fading, turning gray like the rest of the bark. I thought about Silas. I thought about the letter he had left me. Stand firm. I stood firm. I had used the tools he gave me, the knowledge, the patience, the truth. Jackson drove up the dirt road in a new truck, purchased with the whistleblower reward the EPA had granted him. He stepped out, holding 2 beers. He handed one to me and sat down on the grass. "Quiet tonight," he said. "The way it should be," I answered. "You know," Jackson said, looking out over the shimmering lake, "people say you can't fight City Hall. They say you can't beat money. People say a lot of things." I took a sip of the beer. "But physics doesn't listen to people, and neither does the truth." We sat in silence as the stars came out, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. The land breathed around us, heavy and alive. It wasn't my land. It never really was. We were just passing through. But for a little while, I had been its guardian, and that was enough. Justice isn't about winning. It isn't about the money or the vindication. It's about refusing to let something become right just because it is powerful. It is about drawing a line in the dirt and saying, "No further." Even if it costs you your sleep. Even if it costs you your peace. Because in the end, when the glass castles fall and the money runs out, the land remembers who fought for it. The old sentinel waited a lifetime to tell the truth. If you found satisfaction in this ending, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next earth-shattering takedown. See you next time.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.